The checked list box control is a special case of the list box. Like the list box, it enables the user to select one or more items from a list of choices, but it differs in that it displays a checkbox next to each item. Now if you want, there can be a difference between selecting an item and checking it. Or it can be the same thing, and that is controlled by the check on click property. If that's set to true, then clicking an item not only selects it, but also checks it. Now how do you know if an item is checked? Well, the item check event occurs when an item is checked or unchecked. And then you can use the index property of the item check event args class to determine which item was checked. Now the current value property of that will tell you if the item was originally checked, and the new value property tells you if the item is now currently checked. So you use the index property to know which item was checked. The current value property of that class indicates whether the item was originally checked. And then you can use new value to determine if it's been checked, and that's why we're in the item check event, or if it's just been unchecked. So you can use the item check event and those properties to respond to an item in a checklist box being checked. But how do you know which item or items were selected and checked? If you want to know which items were selected, you can use the selected index or selected indices and the selected item or selected items properties. So you can select one or more items and use those properties to find out which items were selected. If you want to find out which items were checked, then you can use the checked items and checked indices properties. And note that interestingly, there's no checked item or checked index property. Well, that's a lot of properties, so let's go see a demo of how you'd use a checked list box in a form and also how you would know which items were checked. Okay, I'm back again in the combo box, list box, and checked list box controls form. And the last thing we want to see on this form is the checked list box, which is this control here. And the way this works is I can click on one of these items, that selects it, and then I can capture the fact that I clicked on that. And in this example, I'm going to say, do I really want to check this? If yes, then it's checked. I can click another one, which selects that, and say that I do want to check that. And then when I click results, I'll see that I checked 2 items, and those 2 items were button and radio button. So let's go back into the form, and let's look at the checked list box control. I populate this the same way that I populate a combo box or a list box, either at design time, in the string collection editor, or at runtime if I want. The check on click property tells me whether or not the item gets checked when I click it. I've set that to true. I can determine the number of items that can be selected because this is a list box. In this example, I have selection mode equal to 1, but I could set it to multi-simple or multi-extended. And I have a little bit of control over how the checkboxes look. I can choose 3D checkboxes to have them sunken a little bit. Or if I wanted them to be flat, this could be set to false. So there's 2 pieces of code I want to look at. The first is the code that determines when I clicked on something and then asks me, do I really want to check this? And then the second piece of code is the code that runs when I click results to see what I selected. So let's go back into the form's code view, and let's look at the item check event handler for the checked list box. And this event occurs when an item is checked or unchecked. So the first thing I want to do is know which item I checked. This event handler takes as a second argument an instance of the item check event args class, represented by E, and E has an index property, so that's going to give me an integer representing where in the list I selected an item. So I can then go to that item in the list, which is an object, convert it to string, and that's going to be checked item as a string. Now the question is, we're in this item check event because we clicked on that item. Did we check it or uncheck it? There are 2 properties on this item event args class. current value and new value. The current value tells me the state of the checkbox before I clicked it. New value tells me the current state. So if the new value is checked, meaning that I'm checking it, I confirm. Do I really want to check it or not? So if I do want to check it, I leave it alone. If I don't want to check it, then I'm going to override this and set the new value back. So why would I do this? I might do this if I wanted to do some validation. The user checks an item. I'm then going to run some code to validate whether or not that item can be checked. And if it can't, I'm going to set it back. And then when I click the results button, I want to know which items in the checked list box were checked. I'll use the checked items property of that checked list box. The checked items property of the checked list box is a list of all of the items I checked. So I'll use the count property of that to see how many items I checked, and then loop through each item in checked items and display that in the selected controls list box on the form. So the checked list box works like a list box in that you can select one or more items, but it differs in that it has a checkbox. And you've just seen the code to determine when you check an item and also to determine which items have been checked.